Liquor store workers, do you have any stories about underage kids trying to trick their way into buying booze? I worked at a bar for a while. One day, this girl came in and showed me her ID. I asked, "Are you sure this is yours?" She said yes. The thing was, I already knew that her ID, along with the purse she had pulled it out of, had been stolen from one of our bartenders the day before. I called the bartender over to take a look at something, and I felt a level of satisfaction that I have never felt again since then. I had a guy come in once with an absolutely terrible fake tattoo. Where I live, you can legally get tattooed at the same age you can legally drink. I think he was hoping the giant tribal tattoo on his arm would throw me off and make me think he was old enough. But it was painfully obvious that he had drawn it on with something like a marker. It was also a hot day, so it had started smudging a little. Back in college, I worked at a liquor store next to a grocery store. Usually the same local people came in all the time. But for a few weeks, this new guy started showing up. He was very nice, polite, looked to be in his 20s, was almost 2 meters tall, and weighed around 115 kilos. One day, he left after buying something, and then an older guy came up to me and said, "You do know that dude is only 16, right?" I could not believe it. It turned out he had been going from store to store until someone caught on. The next time he came in, I asked for his ID. He just said, "Aw, damn it," and ran out the door. I worked at a similar place right next to Walmart, and we had a rule that we had to check the ID of anyone who looked under 40. Here in Western New York, Wegmans checks everyone's ID. I am 62, and I still have to pull out my passport if I want to buy beer. Me. "Do you have any ID with you?" Him. He hands over a driver's license. Me. "It says here that you are 17. Him. "I probably grabbed my brother's license by mistake." Me. "But this is clearly your face." Him. "We are twins." Me. "Twins are usually the same age?" After that, he left pretty quickly. On my 21st birthday, I was standing in line for booze at a festival. In front of me was this obviously very young girl trying to buy Mike's Hard Lemonade. The bartender asked for her ID, took one look at it, laughed, and asked what her zodiac sign was. The girl just stared at her in confusion, walked over to her friend, who was also clearly under 16, and started crying. This happened at the gas station where I worked. A kid who looked about 16 walked straight to the beer cooler. My coworker and I stood behind the counter, watching him suspiciously. He grabbed a 12-pack and came to the register. As soon as he got close, I said, "Can I see your ID?" He looked me dead in the eye and said, "No." Then he put $20 on the counter and just walked out. We honestly had no idea what to do because technically he had not stolen anything, but we also could not accept the money because that would count as a sale to a minor. I left that whole problem for my manager to figure out. For the record, shoplifting is not about whether you paid for something. It is about taking something out of a store without the store's permission. We are all just used to the fact that once you pay, the store usually allows you to leave with the item. Here's an example. You walk into a bike shop and see a bicycle with a price tag that is obviously a mistake, maybe only 10% of its real value. You think, "Great, I am buying it." The employee says, "No, we need to change the tag." But you ignore him, throw down $50 or whatever the tag says, and ride the bike out of the store. Technically, yes, you paid the amount on the tag, but it is still shoplifting because no one gave you permission to take the bike. Not an amazing story, but still. A kid came up to the counter with a bottle of something, so I asked for his ID and got this interesting response. "Do you treat all your customers like this?" He said it in this tone like asking for ID was somehow offensive. I just stared at him. A few seconds later, after a very awkward silence, he finally worked up the courage to ask, "So I guess you are not going to sell it to me without ID?" "Nope." And then he left. I used to work the night shift at a gas station. One time, sometime after 2 in the morning, this little kid came in and handed me an ID. The ID looked completely fine and said he was 21, but the guy himself looked like an actual child. I thought maybe he was some kind of decoy, so I looked outside and saw a police car parked at the far end of the lot. I decided to tell him that we did not sell alcohol after 2 a.m. The kid started yelling at me. "It is only 5 minutes past 2. Honestly, I made that rule up on the spot because I did not want to explain 100 times that I simply was not going to sell him anything. Wait, I do not get it. Let us say he really was a decoy, and his ID was valid. If you sold him the alcohol, could you still get arrested just because he looked too young? There is a thing called strict liability. If you have reason to be suspicious, it does not matter whether the person's ID looks real. It is kind of like having sex with a 15-year-old. Even if she shows you an ID that says she is 18, that does not protect you. I worked at a liquor store right next to the university I was attending. One time, a guy who looked about 18 or 19 came in and handed me an ID. It belonged to some random guy I had been friends with as a kid. I completely lost it. We once threw a big college party where everyone over 21 got a wristband. At one point, they put me at the entrance, and I saw this girl in line who absolutely could not have been 21. Of course, the second it was her turn, all the bragging from her group instantly stopped, like it always does when underage kids realize the bouncer might catch them. Then she handed me her license. I looked at it and realized it belonged to my friend. Not just any friend, but the exact friend whose purse had recently been stolen. I said, "This is not you." She confidently replied, "Yes, it is." I said, "No, it is not. This is my friend. Where is the purse you stole from her?" Her whole group froze in horror. Then she dropped her bag and the entire group ran. Inside the bag were about 15 different driver's licenses. I was bartending at an amusement park at the time. A kid who could not have been older than 12 walked up to the bar and asked me for a beer. Naturally, I asked for his ID right away. He said, "I think I left it in the car with my wife." I could not serve him, obviously, but I respect the effort. So this kid supposedly drove to the park with his wife, left her in the car, and came inside to have fun by himself? Amazing attempt. Next time, he should come up with a story that actually makes sense. A few years ago, I worked at a beer store and bar. One day, two guys who looked 20-something came in around lunchtime. I was not working behind the bar, so this is partly from someone else's point of view. They sat down at the bar, flagged over the bartender, and placed their order. She asked to see their IDs. They handed over their licenses, and she instantly noticed something was off. She called over our boss, who was also the owner. He took one look and confirmed that they were clearly fake. Before anyone could even react, those two idiots were already sprinting down the hallway that led to the employee-only dining room and the storage area. At that point, I saw my boss, another bartender, and the store manager all chase after them, so I ran around the building to try to cut them off, or at least keep them from escaping through the storage area. In the end, the kids locked themselves inside an empty dining room. The owner called the cops and tried to talk to them through the closed door. It ended with the police arriving and escorting them out through the back exit. While they were being walked across the parking lot, one of the morons actually had the nerve to say, "Officer, hey, that is my car right there," like he thought he was about to just drive home. The cop said, "And mine is right behind yours, so let us take mine instead." As far as I know, those licenses were still hanging behind the bar like hunting trophies. Back in the early 2000s, I worked at a liquor store for a few months. On New Year's Eve, a kid came in hoping to buy some booze. He handed me a driver's license from another state. I looked at it, checked the age, and told him he was not old enough. He said, "Oh damn, I must have grabbed my brother's license by mistake. We are twins." He still left without any alcohol. When I worked for the public supermarket chain, management would sometimes check whether cashiers were following the rules by sending in underage people to try buying alcohol. For these little tests, they often used underage employees, and one time they picked me. The problem was that at that point in my life, I had never even tried alcohol. Also, I was 175 centimeters tall and weighed 54 kilos, so when I awkwardly walked up to the counter, holding a huge bottle of Jack Daniels, the employees just looked at each other and started laughing their heads off. I was so embarrassed that I could not even bring myself to try talking them into selling it to me. I just left the store feeling crushed. They never asked me to do that side job again, I had the opposite happen once. I carded a guy because I was absolutely sure he was underage. He laughed like he was trying to hold it in and handed me his ID. I checked it carefully, and it was completely real. Turned out the guy was 10 years older than me. Total man in a child's body situation. I do not work in a store, but I do have this story. When I was about 18, a group of what looked like 10-year-olds came up to me and asked me to buy them a liter of any alcoholic cocktail. I took their $10, went into the store, bought them the cheapest cola with a label that looked like the kind you would see on cheap booze, and kept the change for myself. I worked in a store with a liquor section that you had to reach through a narrow 21-plus corridor. One day, this little kid walked in and handed me his ID. It was obviously fake, so I confiscated it. He said, "I do not give a shit, asshole." Then he went over to the alcohol section, grabbed a 0.7-liter bottle of some garbage vodka, came back to the counter, and insisted that I sell it to him anyway. My coworker and I almost died laughing. In high school, I joined the cadets. It was basically like scouts, except we wore military uniforms. By the time I was 16, I was already over 6 feet tall. One Friday evening after school, I decided to stop by a pub near the train station while still wearing the uniform. To my surprise, they only asked for ID once. All I had to do was say, "I left it back at the base," and they sold me an entire bottle of vodka. Thank you very much for watching. Share your own similar stories in the comments below the video, and do not forget to check out our other episodes. Bye.